Can ovulation cause bleeding? In this video, we are going to learn about whether ovulation can cause bleeding. Can ovulation cause bleeding? Gerard MASSA, the health educator, is the name of the channel, and today we are answering the question whether ovulation can cause bleeding. So without further ado, remember, if you have any questions, you can connect with me on my WhatsApp. We are going to talk about whether ovulation can cause bleeding in this video after this message. Thanks a lot, my friend, for staying around, and we are going to talk about whether ovulation can cause bleeding. But without proceeding, we need to first of all remind ourselves. Remember, we've been talking about ovulation, so we need to remind ourselves what ovulation is. And remember, ovulation is the release of your egg during your danger days, during the days you are most likely to get pregnant. When we have an ovary releasing one of these eggs, which are known as ovarian follicles, that process is known as ovulation. So if this process is happening, ideally a woman is not supposed to be bleeding, but we are answering the question, can ovulation cause bleeding? When this process happens and fertilization has taken place, and this egg has moved along the tube up to your uterine lining, known as the endometrium, and it has attached in here, what is going to happen? Does bleeding happen when the egg is here or when this process is happening? So remember, my friend, to stay with me. We are answering this question and we shall go straight away to the question, to the answer. Ovulation, in most cases, it does not cause bleeding, but according to a recent study, only about 5% of the women can actually bleed during ovulation. So can ovulation cause bleeding? The answer is yes, it can cause bleeding, but only in a smaller percentage of women. Roughly, we are looking at around 5% of the women do experience bleeding. We need to ask ourselves, what normally brings about this bleeding? What normally brings about the bleeding when a woman is ovulating? Remember, ovulation happens on the 14th day. Specifically, and when this egg is released, the female egg is released, it lasts specifically for 12 to 24 hours, where it's expected to be fertilized. If it is not fertilized, then it becomes what we call a corpus luteal cyst, or it becomes basically an empty shell, and then this egg which was released actually disintegrates, or it just disappears. But we are answering the question whether ovulation can cause bleeding. And remember, we've said that ovulation happens on the 14th day of your cycle. If your cycle is regular, it happens on the 14th day. What brings about bleeding in ovulation is that the hormones known as luteinizing hormone and also progesterone hormone they become so high. There's what we call a surge of these hormones. So when progesterone is so high and the luteinizing hormone is actually very high, this can be confirmed by testing using the ovulation predictor kits. So when you do the test and it shows you that LH, or the luteinizing hormone, is extremely very high, then there are high chances that they can interact, they can actually overlap each other, and bleeding can happen. So when you experience bleeding, which actually lasts for around half a day or even a few days, or in the middle of your cycle, remember we've said that on the 14th day, that is when you are ovulating. So when you experience bleeding in the middle of your cycle, then just know that you are ovulating, but again, you are also bleeding. This is a normal phenomenon. You don't need to worry about it. If the bleeding increases or if the color of the blood becomes really dark, then you need to see your healthcare provider. You need to see your doctor or your gynecologist, who will examine you under ultrasound scanning to really tell what is happening. We could think of ovulation causing the bleeding, and yet there is something else. Maybe there could even be some masses that are happening. So when you experience bleeding in the middle of your cycle, just know that you are bleeding most likely in your ovulation day. Or you're ovulating, but at the same time you are bleeding. But what we need to take home is this. What the important point is that when a woman is bleeding and she is in the middle of her cycle, much as we may say she's ovulating, but also there could be other causes of bleeding in the middle of your cycle or bleeding during ovulation, and this actually may even include cancer of the cervix. So always remember to talk to your healthcare provider so that they can go ahead and they do some checkups on you to confirm exactly what is causing this bleeding. So when we talk about ovulation, we are going to talk about the signs you will know that this bleeding is due to ovulation. The first sign is that the blood that comes out during ovulation, normally it is light and pinkish. It is light and pinkish. When this blood is dark, then normally we say that blood is basically not blood. No, that bleeding is bleeding which is not due to ovulation. It is bleeding which is due to implantation. It is what we call implantation bleeding. So, sorry about that. So, when we are answering the question of the differences between ovulation bleeding and then implantation bleeding, is the main difference is this. The bleeding that is due to ovulation, as we said before, it happens in the middle of your cycle or in the midst of your cycle. So if you have a 28-day cycle, then just divide by 2 and just know that on the 14th day, if you started bleeding on the 14th day, specifically that is the day you are ovulating. When you see blood in the middle of your cycle, then just know that that blood is due to ovulation. But when you experience bleeding at the end of your cycle, then that is what we call implantation bleeding. And when we talk about implantation bleeding, specifically, this is bleeding which is due to specifically implantation taking place, the embryo attaching itself, as we looked at this diagram here. When we are talking about implantation bleeding, specifically it happens due to the embryo or the cell that has attached itself on the uterine wall. Thanks a lot. So when we talk about implantation bleeding, the differences between implantation bleeding and ovulation bleeding, the main difference is that ovulation bleeding specifically is that type of bleeding or blood that comes out in the middle of your cycle. And then implantation bleeding, as we said, it is bleeding due to the embryo attaching or our baby attaching on the uterine lining or on the wall of your uterus. So when the baby attaches on the uterine lining, what happens is that there's going to be what we call burrowing or digging. Just as a seed is put in the soil and it begins establishing roots, then the embryo also tends to dig deep, and then of course there's going to be rupture of the blood vessels, also known as lacuna or lacunae, and then this actually causes bleeding. But the bleeding which is due to implantation is basically very dark blood, and it could also be pinkish, but normally it is very dark blood, and if it becomes very heavy and lasts for more days, then you may actually be having something much more serious. It could actually even be your periods, but when they are maybe so painful, so you need to consult your doctor to go ahead and do some checkups. Whereas the bleeding which is due to ovulation, normally it is pinkish, and it is pinkish specifically because when it comes down through your private parts, through your vagina, what happens is that since you are in ovulation and there's lots of cervical mucus which is present, that bleeding normally is pinkish because it is mixed with cervical mucus. Because remember, in ovulation your cervical mucus is specifically increased and it's normally sticky. It's kind of like eggs, it's like the egg white. So when you get those egg whites and you mix with blood, you can imagine what will happen. Normally that bleeding is pinkish. So remember to ask me all your questions in case you do have any questions. But as a summary, we've talked about whether can ovulation cause bleeding, and we've said that yes, it actually happens due to the increase of the hormones progesterone and the luteinizing hormone. Remember to subscribe for new videos I put out every day regarding women's health, pregnancy, and issues to deal with fertility. May God bless and protect us all, and thanks a lot for watching today's video. Remember to connect with me on my WhatsApp. It is +256 701 797876. My WhatsApp is +256 701 797876. Let me answer all your questions. You could actually even schedule a consultation where I will give you plenty of time and we shall discuss all your questions, so that before you go to hospital you'll be having all the necessary information that you need on this process of fertility, on this process of ovulation, on this journey of getting pregnant. The description is having details. Please remember to go to our description so that you can get the details of our video, and please remember to take care. See you in my next video. Bye bye. Thank you, my friend, for attending today's lesson. I hope you have learned something, and please, if you have any questions in regards to what we've just discussed, leave your questions in the comments. Ask me your questions. I will answer all your questions. On this channel, Gerard MASSA, the health educator, I talk about women's health. Have yourself a fantastic and healthy day, and may God bless us all. Bye bye.